Okay, take two of this. So, I was supposed to do this yesterday, and I did do take one yesterday on filling out the bracket of the MLS Playoff and making my prediction, and also do the power rankings of the most likeliest team to win MLS Cup this season. But unfortunately, I made probably one of the dumbest mistakes I ever made whenever I record a video, and that, of course, is that I forgot to press the record button. So basically, I spent 30 minutes doing the video and I did not even press the record button. And since I'm saying that, I want to double check to see if I'm actually pressing the press the record button, which I did, which is good. So yeah, that's why you kind of seen a little bit of these kind of marked, because I have to like erase it since I have to unfortunately start all over again. But yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that happened, and because of that, now most likely I have to move the moving forward series back a day, because today I was planning to do the moving forward series for the Montreal Impact. Looks like that video is going to come out tomorrow alongside with the preview of all these knockout games that is going to happen on Halloween and also on Thursday. But either way, let's actually get into the brackets first. And before we actually get into the bracket, I just want to quickly say that, if you are one of these teams that is in the playoffs right now and you see me not putting your team into the next round, just letting you know that I am trying to be as neutral of this as possible, and that if I don't put your team into the next round, or I don't put your team as MLS Cup winner, it's not because I hate your team, okay? It's just my opinion, and obviously my opinion is not always right, and if you think that my opinion is wrong and you think I made a big mistake in terms of putting your team or eliminate your team in this bracket, then let me know in the comments below. So yeah, I just want to get that out of the way so that there's not going to be a lot of hate, and there is going to be hate after this video. There is going to be some teams that I am going to pick that pretty much not a lot of people thought they have a chance. But we start out with LAFC versus RSL, and this one, unfortunately this one, there's really no surprise in terms of who I think is going to move on into the next round. And by the way, yesterday I used a blue pen to write this, and for whatever reason, I don't know what happened to my blue pen. I have to look for it after this video, so I'm just going to use my black pen for this. But yeah, I think LAFC is going to move on into the second round because, they're playing against RSL, and I know LAFC did play a game against Sporting KC, which they lost, and they only have 3-day rest, or actually 4-day rest, because they're playing on Thursday, if I remember. And RSL has like 10-day rest because they were the only team that didn't play on decision day, and you would think RSL would have the favorites. The only problem with that is that both time RSL play against LAFC, one time they got absolutely destroyed at home against RSL, and that was all the way back in their home opener, which they lost 5-1. And then the other time, they lost 2-0 to LAFC. So certainly LAFC is going to be the heavy favorites coming into this game. And the other factor into this one that is kind of goes against for RSL is that they have not won a lot of road game, and they are the worst team in terms of any of the out of these 11 teams that is in the playoffs. RSL has the worst road record, and they're playing on the road. So yeah, that is definitely not a recipe for potentially moving on into the next round. But you never know, maybe RSL can surprise us all. Certainly they do have good talent on their team, good young talent that is, but I just think LAFC should be able to move on into the next round. And then next up, we got FC Dallas and Portland. I'm gonna say FC Dallas, and this one is a bit of a tough one for me because both of these teams, there is kind of something that goes against in terms of both of these teams coming into this matchup. For FC Dallas, they have really been slumping lately. And especially the fact that they just come into this game after losing to one of the worst team in the league. Yeah, that is not going to give a lot of confidence for FC Dallas. And confident, and certainly in terms of heading into the playoffs in good form, is the key to making a deep playoff run. And with Dallas not having any of those ingredients, yeah, most likely they could be in an early exit. But on the other hand, they do play against a Portland team that, like what I said about RSL, just does not win on the road. They have 4 wins this season on the road, and the last time they won a game besides that beatdown that they gave RSL at Rio Tinto a couple of weeks ago, that was all the way back in June when they were playing the Sounders in the Cascadia Derby. It's been pretty much 4 months since Portland has actually got a road win besides that RSL game. Or I think the better way to say this is that they only have 1 win on the road in 4 months in MLS play. So I think FC Dallas is going to somehow find a way to get through. They'll somehow find a way to find someone to score the goal for them to get them into the second round. But either way, let's be honest, most likely whoever face Sporting KC in the second round is probably going to get manhandled by Sporting KC either way. So this game kind of doesn't matter either way, except for the fact that, you get to play in the second round and you get to have potentially a home game if you're Portland fans. Or if you're an FC Dallas fan, you get an extra home game in the playoffs. But moving on, in terms of this matchup, I think NYCFC is going to move on. And this one, like the LAFC versus RSL game, is kind of a no-brainer. And I know both of these teams have never won a playoff game, and something, of course, have to give in terms of this matchup between teams that are winless in the playoffs. But I just think NYCFC would prevail at the end of this game, mainly because this is literally the same matchup 3 days ago on decision day, and they're playing at Yankee Stadium again. And when you look at the Union and how much they struggle to try to not just contain NYCFC in terms of the attack, but they just couldn't do anything in terms of the attack. They just couldn't play the style of football they have, and I think a lot of that has to do with the funky kind of configuration of Yankee Stadium. And since the way that I think Philly, in terms of playing football, they want to... Their football usually work very well when they have a wider pitch, and since NYCFC Stadium is literally the last place in terms of having a wide pitch and having the narrowest pitch in MLS, that's why probably it's not going to work out for them. And also keep in mind, for the Union, they have a lot of youngsters coming into this playoff game, and usually, youngsters, when they do well in the season, they usually do well in the regular season, but when playoff time comes, that is when there is a lot of question, because usually the lack of experience for those youngsters heading into the playoffs could potentially come back to haunt Philly in this game. But in terms of the next matchup, I think DC is gonna move on, and this is actually a tougher for kind of prediction than what many people would think it would be, considering the fact that Columbus, we saw what happened last season when nobody thought they could beat Atlanta, and guess what they did? They beat Atlanta on penalty. And I feel like it's kind of wrong to just completely write off Columbus because of the fact that they're playing DC United and they're playing away at Alley Field, where DC has been just unstoppable this season. But you never know, Columbus might somehow get a surprising result once again. I still think this Columbus team is definitely not as good as the Columbus team that was a year ago, even though they kind of had almost the same player on that team, minus Ola Kamara, except Ola Kamara is basically replaced with Jerzy Zardes scoring those goals for Columbus. I just think DC just have too much for Columbus to handle, and this is a DC team that is just red hot right now and are a huge dark horse in terms of going deep into the playoffs. But now talking about the second round, and by the way, I forgot to put Seattle's name on here, which is a bit of a mistake. But in terms of this matchup, I think Seattle will move on. And, I know LAFC, during the regular season, they beat Seattle twice. The problem is, that was when Seattle wasn't very good. This is a different Seattle team that LAFC has faced. And even during that time, they really struggled against Seattle. I mean, both times they won 1-0, but you could kind of argue maybe Seattle were very unlucky to not get a draw or a win in that game. Especially the first game where LAFC had one shot on target and yet they still won that game against the Sounders. And then in the inaugural game at Bank of California Stadium, it was just a howler that Stephen Fry made was the difference between that game than LAFC. And, I just think this Sounders team is so much stronger right now. And the question with LAFC in terms of that midfield and in terms of that defense is going to really be ass in this game. And if that midfield and defense does not do well in these two legs against Seattle, then yeah, I think the Sounders is going to move on. And the fact that the Sounders have more experience than LAFC has. Like LAFC coming into this playoff, obviously they have no experience whatsoever because they're a brand new club. Although some of those players on that team, guys like Lee Gwyn, Fell Harbor, and Beta Shore, those guys had some playoff experience in the past. I don't know if it's still just going to be enough against the Sounders that is just red hot right now. And in terms of this matchup, like I said a couple of seconds ago, I think Sporting KC is going to move on because, when you look at this matchup and you look at Dallas, and I know Dallas and Sporting KC split the series, but when Dallas beat Sporting KC, that was when Sporting KC wasn't really that good. And when Sporting KC play against Dallas, they absolutely manhandle Dallas. And, the question with Dallas right now is that, okay, you beat Portland, but Portland is not very good on the road. Now the question is, can you actually beat Sporting KC that certainly are the favorites of coming out of the West in this playoffs, and can you eventually maybe get a win at home and maybe get a draw at Children's Mercy Park? The answer is probably no, because I think Sporting KC just have too much talent on their team, so much more talent and so much more ways to beat you than what FC Dallas has. So yeah, Sporting KC is going to be moving on in terms of the conference final. And then heading into this game, and this is where I am going to make the biggest surprise, and this is where the hate is going to begin. And I'm prepared for this. Atlanta fans are going to be absolutely fuming right now, and they're going to put a lot of hate in the comments, and also I can feel the dislike button is about to be impressed by Atlanta fans because, you've been saying Atlanta has been the favorites of winning MLS Cup, and you've been saying NYCFC is probably going to choke in the first round because of the way that they've been. But the reason why I think NYCFC could potentially move on and why Atlanta maybe will not move on is that, one, Atlanta is a team in Atlanta, and one thing Atlanta Sport is known for in the playoffs is that they always tend to choke. But in terms of the serious reason why I think maybe NYCFC can edge Atlanta out in this matchup is because NYCFC, twice that they play Atlanta, twice they were able to get a draw. And I think this NYCFC team, I know I've been kind of saying that they haven't been very good, but maybe they weren't very good because they were just missing their best player, or their best player wasn't really playing very well. And when you look at that Union game on decision day and you look how comfortable they were and looked like a team that was like the NYCFC earlier in the season, then you could kind of say that NYCFC could definitely go far into the playoffs. Now, I know Atlanta fans will say, well, NYCFC themselves is also kind of a choking kind of team. They always choked in the big moment. Well, yes, they do kind of choke in the big moment too, but so does Atlanta in some way. And the other thing I think you also will say about this matchup is that what is going to be the health of Miguel Almiron. Because if Almiron is healthy for this matchup, then I think maybe Atlanta will have enough to beat NYCFC. I think they'll just have enough quality to get over the hurdle and play against whoever in the conference final. But if they don't have him 100% healthy, and knowing what Atlanta has looked like when they do not have Almiron, yeah, it is really kind of scary. And knowing what has gone on in the last couple of weeks, where Atlanta kind of started to, things are kind of falling apart with this team, where they just don't look like the impressive kind of team we've been always been saying about throughout the season. That's what I'm concerned about this team. And also keep in mind, NYCFC, they have only lost once this season at home. This team is one of the best home team in the league, and a lot of that has to do with the funky configuration. We'll see how Atlanta will try to figure that out and try to maybe figure out how in the world do you able to play on a small pitch. But yeah, for now, I'm gonna make a bold prediction and say NYCFC will move on. And in terms of this matchup between DC versus the Red Bulls, I'm gonna say the Red Bulls will move on, which means that there is gonna be a New York derby in the conference final, which is definitely a great scenario to have if you're a neutral. But I think when you look at this matchup, I know DC has been just red hot, but they are playing against a Red Bulls team that is just completely stacked, and kind of in some way reminds me of the Red Bull or the TFC team of last season, where not only that team, just like this team, won Supporter Shield and break the record in terms of the MLS all-time scoring record, but it's also because this team is really deep. Like, this team is just stacked from top to bottom, and I think, I know in the past, when you look at the Red Bulls, they always have the tendency to choke no matter how much talent they have. But I really think this is probably the most stacked Red Bulls team out of all those Red Bulls teams that we've seen in the past. There is just so many ways the Red Bulls can beat you. And I know the Red Bulls haven't looked impressive in the last couple of games, but that's also one way they can beat you. They can grind you out in a game. They can grind a victory, and they also have beaten some big playoff team. For example, Atlanta, they beat them. NYCFC, they beat them. And also DC United, they still have not lost to DC United in the 3 matches that they have faced. So I think the Red Bulls just going to have enough of a talent to make it into the conference final, which means that now we get into the conference final and talking about the team that is going to be representing the West in the MLS Cup final, and I'm going to say Sporting KC will represent that. And I know Seattle, when you look at this matchup, people will say Seattle would move on because Seattle has all that experience and stuff like that. But then again, I think this is just Sporting KC. This feels like Sporting KC Western Conference to lose more than any other team. Like, when you look at this Sporting KC team and look what they've been doing this year compared to previous year, this is something we have not seen Sporting KC done ever since that great cup run they had a couple of years ago. And in some way, it kind of reminds you of what happened a couple of years ago when they had that good cup run, when they had just a very stacked kind of squad from top to bottom. And I just think that's what Sporting KC has right now. And I think they'll just find enough to outlast Seattle. And both of these teams are kind of similar in some sense, because both of these teams has good defenders, both of these teams has good goalkeeper, both of these teams have good strikers, and both of these teams have good midfield. So both of these teams are definitely good team. And you could also say that maybe this is kind of a toss-up between Seattle and Sporting KC when they match up. But I think Sporting KC will just have enough, because I think maybe if Sporting KC can grind out a draw in that first leg against Seattle, then no doubt Sporting KC is moving through. Like, that return leg at Children's Mercy Park, I think Sporting KC will close out Seattle in that game, and that I think Sporting KC will move on into the MLS Cup final. Which now brings us into the New York Derby, and I'm going to say the Red Bulls will represent the East because, like I said, the Red Bulls, they are just a team that is destined to represent the East, and what they've been doing this season, beating tough teams, and knowing that they're playing against NYCFC, who they love playing against NYCFC. And okay, yes, they did lose one of their game against NYCFC this season in the New York Derby. But the thing is, for the Red Bulls, they just tends to always love playing NYCFC because they always tend to find a way to beat them. And when you look at this matchup, it kind of reminds me of the Columbus versus TFC matchup, where Columbus, nobody expected for them to make it that far into the conference final, and and they were of course facing against TFC, and unfortunately it was just a little bit step too far for Columbus in that MLS Cup from last season. I think NYCFC is going to play the Columbus road, where they gone farther than anybody expected them to go, but ultimately they're just going to stumble by a better team, and that of course is the Red Bulls. Which now bring us to the winner of MLS Cup, and I am going to say the Red Bulls going to win it because this one is kind of also tough to call, because on one hand both of these teams are stacked from top to bottom, and this would definitely be a very interesting matchup, first place versus first place. I think a couple of years ago we had a similar matchup where it was like first place versus first place, but this would be a very interesting kind of game, and you could say that it's kind of a bit of a toss-up in terms of who actually wins. But I think because the Red Bulls will have home field advantage in this game, and again, like I said, they just the East this season, like last season, just look much better than what the West is. I mean, I know the West kind of caught up a little bit to the East in terms of the quality overall in terms of the league, because in the East there was some very bad teams this season, unlike last season where the East was completely stacked and the West was garbage. This year the West overall has kind of catch up a little bit, but it still hasn't really catch up in terms of the top two team. I think Atlanta and the Red Bulls, you can argue, are better than what Sporting KC are right now, and in the end I think the Red Bulls is going to win. I think the East will prevail once again this season. And now moving on and talking about the teams that is most likely gonna win MLS Cup, as I'm gonna do a power rankings on that. Actually, before I do that, let me just grab this paper because I wrote all the rankings on a paper, and I forgot to grab it a couple of seconds ago. So yeah, we'll start with 12, and the team that is the least likeliest to win MLS Cup is going to be RSL. And, they're the worst road team in all of these teams in the playoffs. And I just feel like RSL is going to be a version of the San Jose Earthquakes last season. Remember how the Quakes, I think they not only had the worst goal differential and had like a minus 22 goal differential heading into the playoffs, and I think they also had like the worst playoff, or not the worst playoff, but the worst kind of road record heading into the playoffs out of any team in the league. There was a sense that they were gonna just get absolutely beat down, which they did, and I think this time it's gonna be the same case where I fear RSL probably won't get a beaten like what Vancouver did to the Quakes, because at least for RSL, they don't just capitulate when they get conceded a goal. Unlike last season when the Quakes, when they get conceded a goal, they just completely capitulate. But I just think LAFC will just have enough over RSL, which is why RSL is probably the least likeliest to win MLS Cup. And in 11th place, I am going to say it's going to be the Union. And, I know for part of these last couple of weeks I've been praising on the Union fighting adversity and just proving people why that this team is not just gonna completely fall apart late in the season, unlike the last couple of times in the past season where the Union just kind of fade away in the end. But I think the Union probably are most likely as not going to win MLS Cup is because they're facing the same team that they just lost a couple of days ago, and the fact that this is a very young Union team that does not have most of these players have no MLS experience or MLS playoff experience whatsoever. So yeah, I fear that this is probably as far as they go, and I know Union fans will once again suffer another heartbreak in the playoffs, but I just think that the Union future is definitely bright with all those young talent that they have. And in 10th place, I'm going to say Dallas. And since I put Dallas, I might as well just put Portland on here too because, let's be honest, both of these teams, when they face off each other, whoever wins the next match will probably get a spanking by Sporting KC. And if they don't somehow, in some way, were able to get through that, then they'll probably get a spanking by the next team. I mean, both of these teams are certainly not very good team, and I don't see both of them go all the way to MLS Cup or even go deep into maybe the conference final. So I think they're going to be in the 10th and 9th spot. And then in 8th place, I'm going to say Columbus because, again, and I put Columbus higher than all these teams that got eliminated in the first round because notice how all these teams, except maybe FC Dallas or Portland, is not going to make it into the second round. But the reason why I put Columbus a little bit higher is because, we saw what they did last season, and they can definitely do that again this season, and certainly could shock people again with a unexpected run that they have. So I'll say Columbus is going to be in that 8th spot as the 8th most likeliest team or in the 8th place spot as the most likely team to win MLS Cup. And then in 7th place, I'm going to say LAFC because there's just so much question about this midfield and back line that I don't know if they're going to go deep in the playoffs with kind of a very sketchy midfield and also in a back line. And just also overall, they are a first-year expansion team. Expansion team usually does not do very well when they get into the playoffs. And I know this is an expansion team that is currently managed by Bob Bradley, and we saw what happened in '97 when he was managing another expansion team, the Chicago Fire. They got them all the way into the MLS Cup final and eventually winning the whole thing. Yeah, that was because they were with a bunch of other expansion teams around that time, or teams that just have 1 year experience. And back then, the soccer that was played is completely different the way that MLS is. MLS is not the same today as when it was 20 years ago. So I think LAFC will probably crash out eventually, maybe in the second round, or in the best case scenario, maybe in terms of the third round. And then in 6th place, I'm going to say NYCFC, and they really move up in terms of this power rankings. Originally, I put them at 12 because I didn't think that they were going to make it through, but knowing that now, I started to see some of their most important player coming back for this team and how they made a statement in that Union game that, we are back. We're going to be like the NYCFC team early in the season. You could say that this team could potentially go pretty deep into the playoffs, and they definitely want to go deep into the playoffs. I mean, it's been nothing but disappointment for NYCFC fans, so I'm going to say they'll be the 6th team in terms of the most likely to win the MLS Cup. And in number 5, and this is where the hate is going to happen once again, because I'm going to put Atlanta at number 5, and Atlanta fans is going to hate me putting them at 5 instead of putting them in the top 2. But again, Almiron's health, Tata Martino announcing his kind of final year, and how instead of what many people thought it would be a positive impact where the players will really want to give him one more trophy before he leaves, instead the players just looks even more down. And that's why I put Atlanta at 5th place, because there's just so much surrounding. And also for Almiron too, there's been so many report about him going to Europe. You wonder, is he getting distracted by that too, and the fact that he's not totally focused on the current club that he is in. And if that is the case, Atlanta could easily just fall apart. And in 4th place, I'm going to say DC United, because like I said, this is a very dark horse team. And I think one thing I didn't mention in this match between the Red Bulls and DC United is that I think one way that I can see this being a big upset and that DC could be moving on into the conference final is that if they win at Audi Field, then there is a big possibility that DC could actually move on into the conference final, because now that puts a lot of pressure on the Red Bulls to win at home. And although DC has not looked very good at all heading on the road this season, they'll find a way to fight and scratch a point so that they can move on into the next round. But in terms of 3rd place, I'm going to say Seattle, because, they've done it before. We've seen this episode in the past, so why not that we're not going to see this episode again of how Seattle will somehow in some way just completely blow by everybody in the playoffs and somehow find themselves in the MLS Cup final again for the 3rd straight year. And I'm pretty sure if you're an MLS fan, that is probably the last opponent you want to see in MLS Cup final, because you're kind of tired of Seattle being there, and the fact that it's kind of like seeing the Warriors always in the playoffs, and just you're kind of tired them being in the playoffs. You're kind of tired that they just somehow in some way, with all the bullshit that has happened, find themselves in MLS Cup final. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of hate if Seattle does reach all the way into the MLS Cup final. Or actually, I shouldn't say hate, but more like saltiness that is going to happen. But in terms of the teams, the 2nd place team, the second most likeliest to win MLS Cup, is going to be Sporting KC, because, like I said, Sporting KC, this is the Western Conference for them to lose, pretty much. They have a team that certainly is destined to head into the final, which is why I'm going to put them in 2nd place. And then the favorites of winning the MLS Cup final and winning MLS Cup this season is none other than the Red Bulls, who I picked them to win the MLS Cup. And yeah, that is pretty much it. That is pretty much my prediction, filling out the bracket and also doing the power rankings in terms of the team most likely is to win MLS Cup. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this? Again, as I'm going to repeat myself, if I put your team not the way that you want me to put in the brackets, for example, Atlanta fans, if you hate the fact that I decided to eliminate you in the 2nd round, then let me know in the comments below, why do you think I am wrong that Atlanta is not going to get eliminated if they do play against NYCFC or Philly in the 2nd round. So yeah, let me know in the comments below. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.